So for this lecture, let's take a look at a Capture One catalog versus a Capture One session. Now, if you remember from last week, I hinted at or looked at briefly, well, not last week, but one of our previous lectures actually. But anyways, I showed you guys that when you create a new catalog, Capture One creates a folder that looks like this. Well, it's not a folder actually, it's a locked hidden folder. You see this a lot in a lot of different applications that come from, say, Apple. For example, when you're dealing with Apple Pictures, which is the app that you have on your smartphone and stuff like that, the Photos library is a locked package. And if you do a right click on it with a Mac, you can go in and say show package contents. So it's actually called a package, and it's don't confuse it with an install package. But anyways, but in here, obviously, here's a database with a bunch of files that can only really be read by the Apple interface and the application itself. And then we have a folder here that's called Originals. And in here, if I click on these, you can see that there are some photographs that are inside of here, such as this one. It's actually a screenshot. And these photos are in here based on when they were created and locked into these locations. Now, you can't do anything else with this because it's just basically hidden. But one of the things that's kind of fascinating about this is that when Apple has this, they end up locking you out of being able to see this, which is a good thing, because if you came in here and started messing with these files, the application actually stops working. Now, the the Capture One catalog, same thing. It's locked. I can't see anything in here, but if I go in and say show package contents, when I open this up, it shows me all of the original files that are on here. And it's usually based on when they were imported in. For example, this is a folder containing 59 images that are from the shoot we were talking about previously, that I imported in. And so this is how it puts it in here. Now, the downside is this is based on when it was imported, not based on when it was shot. So I could be importing in something I found on one of my camera cards that I shot 3 years ago, but now it's going to show up as a date of being most recent. Obviously, when it shows up inside of the catalog, it will show up in the date order that it's supposed to be. Also inside of here, there is the database file that is created by Capture One that is only really readable by Capture One. And then this is a cache file that creates the previews for any images that are in here, which means that if I have zoomed in and things like that, it shows me those different versions of it. And then it also shows me the previews of the way I may have processed an image, like if I cropped it or turned it to black and white or whatever. That information is also contained inside of the previews. Now, on thumbnails, same thing. These are just the files representing the images as they are viewed inside of Capture One in the layout when you're looking at the grid. So that's how this all works. Now, the great thing about this is it creates a complete package, which, depending on how your workflow goes, you could create a catalog, you could import a bunch of images, do a bunch of processing, and then send it to the next level. If you're working with a retoucher, the retoucher would go in, take a look at that catalog, and then they would start working on the images, and then most likely output them for whatever the purpose is. Now, Capture One also has the capability of creating what is called a session. So I will go ahead and click new session here, and it says, what do I want to call this? So I'm just going to call this Photo 5 Fall 2023 Session Sample. Now, I will also choose where I want to put this again as before. Clicking these three dots here, it will open up an interface saying where I want to put it, and in this case it's going to the right place. I'll say go ahead and put it here. And if I've created a template for it, I can actually choose the template there. That's a deep dive for later on. Also in here, the subfolder settings, you can go in and name all of these different folders that get created. For example, when you first bring in the images, they go into the capture. If you start selecting the images and giving them star ratings and color ratings, then they would go into selects. If you choose to output the images, the outputted images will go to output, and then the subfolder here, the trash subfolder. Now, so this means that the images, when you delete them, are removed from the catalog, or in this instance, they're removed from the session, but that means that they're in the trash until you empty the trash, which means you're getting them out of your view, but they're still available to you unless you choose to erase, completely dump them. This is a deep dive item that has to do with doing not tethered, but sharing your workspace when you're working in Capture One across the internet to somebody else, what we call a live capture. And then you also have this open in a new window, which means that every time you open one of these up, you can click open in a new window. So these are the options that you have in here as you're working. I'm going to go ahead and create a parent folder here for this. I cancel that for just a second. I need to name the folder the same name as that. So I'm going to go ahead now and choose to put this into a folder in here. Now, when you bring them in, when you create up this session, it goes ahead and you say OK, and I'm going to go ahead and choose OK. And now it is creating a session. Now you'll notice that the interface looks identical. There's nothing here to tell you that there's anything different, but this is where it gets unique. When I look at the file itself, it creates a folder that's named the same as like a parent folder, which ironically I put it into a parent folder. So I basically could go ahead and delete this real quick. So when you name it, or when you first create it, it will actually create a parent folder for you, kind of like Lightroom does. And then in here, I have all the similar stuff that I had to with the catalog, but in this instance, everything inside of the session is individual folders and the actual database file. So this creates something similar to a Lightroom catalog where all the information is stored inside of here. And so now if I bring in some images, in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and so to bring in some images, we'll click import. Uh-oh, we've crashed. Haven't seen that in a while. So I'm going to go ahead and close this import window. We will reopen this. We will go ahead and select import. Once again, I'm looking at a lot of these same images from the London batch of stuff that you guys saw before. So I'm going to go ahead and just select all of these. It's still thinking about them. And now it says all the images have been picked. Once again, when I'm importing, I have all the same features as before when I mentioned the filtering, where I can go in and have the images, be similar based on content and things like that. So all that stuff can be applied again. When I'm importing in again, I can do file naming. Now, file naming is unique because it's got a couple of different ways to approach this. I can go in and name the job, and I could also go in and name it based by different things. So, for example, if I call the job London Trip, it works just like before. It would just go ahead and name it that based on if I choose this, then click here and then say, okay, let's do, instead of this, we'll choose job name. I would just go through this list, grab job name, and drag it up here instead. Maybe put it in front of that one. And so it's basically doing job name and then image name. And basically that's how it would go in and name it. Now if I go ahead and say okay, it's going to go and show in like this and show me what I did. I should have put in some space bars and underscores and whatnot, but in this instance I am not going to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and click here and remove the job name, and I'm just going to keep it with the original names. Same thing as before, ejecting card is an option. Picking all the images is good. Then I'll go ahead and say import all, and it just brings them all in. Now the other thing that a session is incredibly good for is realistically working on a project that is a smaller amount of images. And what we mean by this is that it's not, 10,000 images. It might only be, a couple hundred to 1,000. But it's also good when shooting tethered shoots. For example, as you're doing studio shooting, you could open up a session and do live capturing, which means it's importing from both the camera and from the it's coming in from the camera as you're shooting, and at the same time it will also write it to the card, and so it brings it straight into here. What's great about this is that you can see the image in a much larger view than you would on the back of the camera. You can also have it set up to secondary or third monitors, where you could have a client in the room watching the shoot as it's going, and they could be like communicating to you, or they could even be it could be shared across the internet, which means that it would be basically a cloud share of the shoot, so the art director and the client could actually be in a separate city and looking at the photo shoot and communicating with some ideas about what they're looking at and stuff like that. So it just becomes one of these things that is important to think about when you're looking at whether or not you want to shoot a session or a catalog. Now, sessions can also be given to an art director or to a retoucher as a complete package ready to go, because everything's good to go. You could choose to import the images into the same location that they are actually at, or you could go ahead, you can bring them in where they are, or you could bring them in and add them to a new destination. But as you're capturing, obviously it's coming in and they're being imported right in. So that is important to think about when you're doing it. Some people like the fact that it's not a completely enclosed package. Later on we will talk about a way of exporting out an image as something called an EIP, which is kind of like a self-contained zip file that has a whole bunch of Capture One stuff in it that can be then imported directly into Capture One. You can also bring in numerous sessions into a catalog. So for example, if you're doing a big fashion shoot, you might, every different model or outfit style change or whatever. If you're doing a summer collection shoot and you're doing a day-long shoot, that whole day might be the session, or you might change it up if you're changing between evening wear and leisure wear, and that type of thing, depending on what the shoot entails. So there is no right or wrong way of working with this. I find that I like to use sessions when I'm working with smaller batches of images, when I'm working in Capture One, because it just makes it more functional. So hopefully this makes some sense on how this works and what this is actually for versus the other things that you've seen. So that hopefully explains the differences between a catalog and a session.